Okay, so I'm going to shift a focus after listening to Beth's very inspiring talk about everything happening in marine ecosystems. And I'm going to drill into some of the detail, specifically focused on trying to understand the role of large top predators in ecosystems and kind of what that means in terms of ecological resilience, and hopefully to get us start thinking about how it might also impact these wider areas of resilience as well. So this is a large top predator. This is what comes up when you Google those words. It's got, I think, 36 centimeter teeth, so it's quite ferocious and obviously quite huge. It's 3 times the size of a killer whale. So this is an extinct sperm whale, mega predator. I can't pronounce the Latin name, but I think the kind of common name is called the Leviathan. So what is the role of big predators like this in food webs and ecosystems? We know that body size has been referred to as the master trait, so it influences all sorts of things, many different types of biological rates, and also the role of organisms in food webs. But the way that we've looked at food webs has been pretty variable through time. So if we start off at the left, that's the classic random interaction matrix of different species, and it leads to the bottom structure. We know that incorporating body size leads to structure in food webs, and it actually has contributed to understanding why the food webs that we observe in nature are much more complex and stable than they should be in the absence of this size structuring. So in the middle, we have what I've called allometry, which is the trophodynamic sort of point of view, where each species has a mean body mass, and the relative sizes of predators and their prey are highly structured. And this leads to substantially more links between species. And then furthest to the right, we've got a sort of a new player on the field, which is actually come out of probably about 40 years empirical work on communities, so empirical size spectra. We've now got dynamical and species-based size spectra of food webs. And how they differ from the other two pictures is that they add many more links because you account for the ontogenic changes that species go throughout their lives. And you just add much more structure to the food web, many more links, and it's actually a configuration that is much more stable than the other two. So size spectra have been studied empirically a lot. There's also a history of studying size spectra in coral reefs. People like Nick Graham and Pete Mumby have been looking at size spectra, including some recent work on the dynamics of those. And one of the major areas of research in food web ecology is to try to understand what the consequences are for species loss in these food webs. Now, looking at the leftmost, you can see that in the random web, the deletion of a top predator will follow several links, but as you move to the right, the deletion of a top predator affects many more of the other species that it's linking up. So there are cascading extinctions in these webs. So those are the consequences just by considering size as a structuring feature of food web. But what about the dynamics? We're interested in resilience, and that means that we need to think about the dynamical properties of these systems. And there, of course, has been a lot of work on that for the random webs, going back to the work of May in the 70s. But a lot less on size spectra on the right. So I'm going to give you an overview of some of the recent work that's coming out and kind of some of the hints that the data show whether or not they support some of those findings. So first of all, if you want to learn more about size spectrum methods, particularly applying this from a multi-species point of view or incorporating traits, I can point you to this R package called MISR, which gives you a nice overview of some of the history of that work and allows you to look at the classical community size spectrum where we totally ignore species, to trait-based approaches where you account for the life history of different species, to actually parameterizing these systems to real species, real ecosystems. And these patterns of abundance versus body mass on the x-axis are emergent, and they come from the processes of an individual interacting with the size spectrum of its prey, its metabolism, its of reproduction and growth and mortality that arise from predation events. So what has size spectra told us about resilience? Well, using the very simple community, no species traits models, we've learned so far that at least for very small perturbations around steady state or the local stability, the local asymptotic stability, we get stability and also greater resilience or faster decay to a steady state when predators eat relatively larger prey relative to their own size. That's a smaller predator-prey mass ratio. When they are generalists, so they have a wider breadth of sizes, if they have a larger maturation size or a longer life history, whether there's higher trait diversity has been looked at in the context of just that one additional trait, maturation size, and also in the presence of things like benthic pelagic coupling, which adds much more weak links to these food webs. And those findings are fairly consistent with the allometric model findings of stability, though we haven't yet done any really systematic studies. So we're gonna think about these predictions and just see whether there's any evidence of these patterns holding in real systems. So one of the most common across all the different models, one of the most common predictions that we get out of these is that smaller predator-prey mass ratios lead to higher resilience. And what we would expect to see in real data would be lower variability of time series. So right here we can see the predator. It's feeding on this range of prey sizes, but the cute little prey here is not too far away from its own prey size. And as you move further, as your prey moves further away from your own body size, what the models show is that this leads to reduction in resilience. So here we would expect to see much higher temporal variability for species with mean predator-prey mass ratio. So although I should note that the model results have been looked at from a very broad brush community, not looking at species traits. Here, we're going to look at the variation in traits across species because that's where you see the differences in these kind of parameters. So from that context, we're actually jumping to the population level. So one of the things that we did was compiled population time series for 26 marine fish populations. These are from shelf seas from different areas around the world, with data from individual predator-prey mass ratios. So this is a data that's publicly available by Barnes et al. 2008. And when you plot the variability or the CV in abundance versus the mean predator-prey mass ratio, what you see for the dots in black is the pattern that the models predict. And the models predict that this pattern of variability or resilience should be seen at any size throughout the size spectrum. So you see it in the total biomass of the whole population as well as for the recruits. Now, when I first started compiling these data, I only went up to here, and I really was quite happy that that was the perfect match to the model expectations. And then as I added more data points, lo and behold, there's this other line down here, and those populations are different. First of all, they're much larger than these fish species over here, which are demersal stocks, demersal fish species, mostly some pelagic as well. These are tunas, swordfish, the large migratory fish that integrate energy across vast spatial scales compared to the demersal fish stocks to the left of the plot. So in its purest form, if we just look at predator-prey mass ratio in the models, it doesn't explain everything. You need to also think about other traits in the model as well. And so what we're looking at now is the role of, for example, the addition of the life history and the metabolic constraints and the movement relationships of these species to try to understand the trade-offs between different parameters for the purpose of looking at resilience. Now, as Beth so nicely showed as well, traits actually change, and they change in response to fishing, they change in response to the environment. Here we're thinking about directed changes in body mass in response to fishing. So one of the predictions from the models is that we'd see this as we lose these larger generalist top predators, we would get this increase of biomass variance through time. So that's a shifting variance or a move towards a threshold or tipping point, which is often referred to by the early warning signals folks. So here what you expect to see as we move towards these smaller, either body size, predator-prey ratio or diet breadth, not necessarily smaller from predator-prey, the opposite pattern, you would get this shift in temporal variability through time. And this is for the whole bulk community of everything, not looking at populations now. So one of the programs that I've been involved in for several years now is called Indices, and what we've been doing is compiling data on indicators for the effects of fishing. One of these indicators is actually mean body size or mean length. So we're going to think about that as a trait and see whether it can tell us anything about a change in resilience. Again, what we would expect to see here is that a reduction in body size would lead to increased temporal variability in the biomass. And that, at least for this preliminary data set that we've compiled, is what we see. So in the middle here, we've got a few gray points. Those are non-significant changes, but you would expect that. The slope's around 0 for both the mean change in length on the bottom. And what you get here is a number of ecosystems where we've got a decrease in resilience corresponding with a decrease in the mean length, and also some increases up here as well. So we've just started looking at this, and we're trying to understand it more and move further with this through, well, hopefully some more data. So obviously those systems that we're observing are actually being impacted and changed, and we're inferring these different responses from the role of fishing. Also, we know that similar changes are happening due to climate change, so it's very tricky to decouple the effects of fishing at the same time as the effects of climate change when we look at the data sets. But we can use the models to do this, and we can also use such models to look at the sort of wider implications of this interesting kind of quite, I don't know, idiosyncratic field of ecology. What does this actually mean for people? So as part of some ongoing work that started out of an international project based in the UK called Quest Fish, we've been moving from the physics on the left to the ecology, predicting the fish, all the way up to people, by combining these different models under climate change outputs and climate change forcing for the global coastal ocean. Currently, my work is focused on filling in the white areas of the map on the top left, which is the rest of the ocean, but my models are kind of running and not complete enough to show to you today. But one of the things that we've learned from looking at these model outputs is that you can see as fishing increases, so if we look at the bottom panel here, I've got a change in the CV in the large fish biomass. That's the same indicator of resilience that we've been looking at through all the other plots. And I've got 3 kind of histogram or box plots. This is to the left, it's low fishing, no fishing, low fishing, and high fishing. So you can see in each one of these ecosystems, what we get is this ramping up of variability as fishing increases. And so what that means is that the ecosystems themselves, as they're fished down and as body sizes are truncated, because you can see the loss of production that corresponds to those ramping up in fishing of the large fish biomass, we see that these systems are becoming much less resilient to the effect of the climate change and variability that's being forced in the models. So that tells us about what might happen in the future, but it doesn't tell us about how we can change things or what harvesting we should be doing or how we can inform management. But these types of tools are being used, or this beginning to be part of quite a heated debate actually on balanced harvesting, for example. So there's lots of papers coming out on this, and the basic finding is that size selective fishing destabilizes fish communities. Again, that's because of this loss of large, mature fish that are being targeted. However, the models themselves differ in some respects in terms of their assumptions and their key parameters, and that's an area that we really need to not just look at these plots in the way, not just confront the patterns in the data, but actually actively bring the data and the models together to more rigorously test them, both the assumptions and the predictions. So in summary, we're developing new tools for investigating ecological resilience that can be combined and are being combined with social and economical considerations. I've shown you some kind of hot off the press empirical support for the role of resilience of large top predators using these approaches, and currently revisiting the data sets and looking across a range of models for this. The models predict a loss of large predators through fishing, which reduces resilience of the community to climate change. And finally, to understand how we can move towards restoring resilience in ecosystems, I think we really need to understand the drivers and interactions between these traits. Current questions, just to put out there for people who are interested and want to have some fun with this stuff: how are multiple traits changing, adapting under multiple stressors? What about wider considerations of functional diversity? How do these influence patterns and predictions? So I mentioned that we're just beginning to apply these to coral reefs. That's where we have to confront a much wider range of different functional groups that isn't so fish biased as the other stuff that I've shown you. Non-linearity, transience, hysteresis, alternate stable states. These are common things that are observed in coral reef resilience studies, and this is just completely new territory for this type of work. Nothing's been done on it, so that's an area of interest. And ultimately, how well can we predict the resilience with these models of fisheries, and what does that mean for society now and in the future? Thank you very much.